What are some examples of things that were acceptable for parents to do in the past 40 years that would be illegal or totally not acceptable today? Dad had a camper top on his pickup and I rode back there all the time. No seat belt, no seat, just the back of a pickup. Yep, I remember going on road trips as a small child and I would sleep in the back window space. Making your kid smoke a whole carton of cigarettes as a punishment for smoking a single cigarette. I've heard of some parents still doing this with drinking, and then wake them up early the next morning and have them do chores while hungover. Parents dropping their kid off at the playground and then going to run some errands. My mom went to a small rural school, like a one-room schoolhouse. The parents used to send their preschool kids off to school with the older school-age siblings and then spend the day in town. Leave your kid alone in the car for 10-15 minutes while the parent ran into a store for an errand, etc. Heck, you can't leave them in the car for a minute in CA. I understand why the law is what it is, but it's still aggravating. The idea that I could get a ticket for leaving my kid in the car for literally 30 seconds while I run back in my house to get my wallet is lame. I was born in 1980 and asked my mom this question. She says when I was pregnant with you, the doctor would smoke a cigarette. During the internal exam, I would also have a smoke. In the hospital they smoked. I remember the nuns asking me if I wanted to hold you and I said of course, stubbed out my smoke, waved my arm in the air to clear the air a bit and they wheeled you in. The smoking around your kids didn't surprise me as much as the doctors and nurses doing it in the hospital. Nowadays it's actually the nurses I know that smoke the most. They all have to walk a good ways from the hospital before they can legally light up, but they know exactly how far, and they all go to that spot, smoke, and come back into the hospital. Anyone rub whiskey on teething baby gums anymore? My dad rubbed scotch on my gums and I was born in 1990. I wouldn't be opposed to doing that to my kids either. Don't tell my wife though. It's not unacceptable yet, but it seems trick-or-treating happens less and less every year. Anyone else experiencing this in their neighborhoods? We played with yard darts. My friend was drunk at a party one night and started throwing yard darts straight up in the air in the crowd of people. Corporal punishment is much less accepted than it used to be. I guess it will be illegal sooner or later. Standing your kid up on the car seat with no seatbelt in between the two of you. I was about 4. Did this all the time. Huge old car with bench seats. 2 chain smokers in a car with your kids with rolled up windows. Sending your kid in to buy a pack of cigarettes for you. Smacking the taste out of your kid's mouth in public if the kid got out of line. Free range parenting. Although I hope that is making a comeback. Sending your kid in to buy a pack of cigarettes for you. I'd forgotten that. I remember telling my father the prices had gone up so I'd have enough left over to buy candy. I also bought beer for him. I forget how old I was, but I couldn't see over the counter. Well, my mom smoked her entire pregnancy with both me and my younger sister. I was born 3 pounds and was IQ for a long time. She has no regrets. I was born in 1992 and sister in 1993. Disciplining children that aren't yours. The way my parents talk. Back in the day it was completely acceptable to dole out punishment to your kids' friends or your siblings or friends' children, as well as for teachers, priests, basically any other adults to discipline children that weren't theirs more harshly than they're allowed now, and the parents of those children would be completely okay with it if not totally encouraging or straight out saying if my kid fricks up, do whatever you want to them. Now, though, someone else's child could basically murder someone in public and if you say a dang thing about it their parent will go totally ballistic on you. When I was a child I used to go to the shop and buy cigarettes for my parents. Depending on the laws, ordinances, regulations in your area, the following practices that were common when I was growing up, 70s early 80s, can get you in trouble with social services today, and in some cases are downright illegal. Allowing your children to stay home alone while you were at work. It was very common in my time to come home from school to an empty house and be alone for several hours while the parents were working. We used to be called latchkey kids. Allowing your children to walk the streets unsupervised. When I was growing up, the rule was to be home when the street lights came on. Before that, parents barely knew where their kids were, who they were with, or what they were doing. and this was considered normal. Today, it's considered neglect at best. As a somewhat ironic side note, people tended to know their neighbors and their kids' parents a lot more than they do today. Although my parents may not have directly known where I was or what I was doing, it was very common for my parents' friends. My friends' parents are just random neighbors to see what I was doing and make a phone call, leading to my parents knowing exactly what I was up to anyway before I even got home and had enough time to come up with a convincing lie. The same applied to everyone else I knew. They didn't need no stinking internet to know what their kids were up to. A kid with an even moderately connected parent wasn't getting away with jack crap. Most forms of discipline, any kind of physical discipline, is often considered child abuse, and even punishments such as taking things away or grounding are sometimes frowned upon in favor of timeouts that are about as effective as you'd think they are. Read. Not at all. Full stop. Sending your kids to the store for a pack of cigarettes. I remember being as young as 5 years old, being sent across the street to the corner store, and buying Pall Mall cigarettes for my father. Not happening these days. While I haven't heard of any areas where it's outright illegal, even allowing your kids to play unsupervised in the backyard will still get you the stink eye from nosy neighbors who can't mind their own business. And I have heard of nosy neighbors trying to get parents charged with neglect for it. Obscene messaging. While we didn't have smartphones or the internet to worry about, we did have a. Libidos, and b. Polaroid cameras. If your parents found these pictures, you probably got a stern talking to, grounded, and probably were never allowed to talk to the other person again. Yeah, right. But you certainly weren't brought up on criminal charges and faced having your life ruined because Susie gave you a picture of her tea. I'll actually say that timeouts were what my parents used and they were extremely effective. But my timeouts were being sat in a chair to stare at a wall indefinitely, on the other side of the house from my parents, who acted like I stopped existing except to inform me they had added time onto my sentence if they decided I was whining too much. Spankings. I can't imagine how I would have turned out if my mom never broke out the wooden spoon on my butt. When my dad was a child, my grandparents made him pick out the tree branch they were going to beat him with. If it was too small, they'd make him get a bigger one and give him an extra few whacks. He told me this pretty nonchalantly and gave the impression that it wasn't a big deal back in the day. Being openly xenophobic. Maybe someday I should move out of the South to a glorious land where this is true. Letting children roam cities or other places by themselves. In America, at least with the Skenazy story, it gets people in an uproar. When I was in China over the summer, my relatives threw me out of the house and told me to be back by dinner. I got on the subway, wandered around Beijing, which is much bigger than any American city by a long shot, and came back without a scratch. Parents, teach your kids some common sense and street smarts. These two can take your children much farther than anything else they learn in life. Also, let your kids go outside. Let the frick up every once in a while. The real world is a better teacher than any Ivy League professor. This one is tough. I was kicked out of the house and just liked being on my own. Went all over town without an issue. But my cousins did the same and got pregnant. My friend got violated. They often traveled in groups and loving families. But kids make bad choices. I'm not sure what the best answer is anymore. Taking your kids out of school. Allowing you kids to play in the yard alone. Of course, you shouldn't just let your kids do whatever unsupervised, but nowadays even letting kids out of your sight for a second is seen as bad parenting. Statistically, there's a better chance of the child dying inside due to trauma than being kidnapped by a random person. Fear is the most powerful motivator. Letting kids walk home from school, or just about anywhere. I've got to say, correcting other people's kids. When I was little, I learned two very important lessons from other people's parents. First, I took off tearing through a parking lot ignoring my folks' orders to stay next to them. I almost got hit by a car backing out of a space. The father of the family in the car hopped out and sternly lectured me about car safety until my parents caught up with me. They nodded along and thanked him. The second time I got caught by someone else's dad, I'd run 2 blocks to their house shoeless. I never listened to my parents about putting on shoes. Sandy's dad opened the door, looked at my black, nasty feet, and tucked me under his armpit and carried me all the way back home, where he ordered me to put my shoes on and left. I was so mortified by both incidents, I never ran in parking lots or bucked my shoes again. I try doing that now, and I get a lot of "don't you speak to my child that way" yes. Disowning your kid if they're LGBT still happens. There's a huge homeless LGBT teen population. It's just not particularly acceptable in most places anymore. Drinking and driving. My parents used to tell that they would drive around their towns just drinking in high school. If they ever got pulled over, they were just told to go home. Today you would get a one-way ticket into the back of a police car. Corporal punishment. I have heard stories from my mom and dad about their parents using belts to spank them. If that were to happen nowadays, I am sure that CPS would get called on them. My parents did this to me. I'm 26. My mom left me in the car a lot, windows down at my insistence though. This was because I was smart enough to know she'd rush if I was in the car, and she was smart enough to rush. Listen to Rolf Harris songs. Letting very young kids to run around town and do whatever they want without any supervision. I've always seen in movies and TV shows little kids that were just allowed to wander around the neighborhood city or get on a train, bus, or bicycle by themselves without any adults, and it always fascinated me. Apparently, free-range children. Getting the Switch is a big one. Adrian Peterson showed us that is out of favor with society right now. Let me tell you, nothing was worse than a Switch. My wife is aghast that I got that. Child labor is one too. I paid taxes when I was 10. My social security statement shows that I was a contributing member of society before puberty. Honestly, one thing that happened to me as a kid that I don't see or hear about is parents openly telling stories of how their kids fricked up. My failures growing up were well known by everyone that was friends and family with my parents. This had a great effect on me because I am not afraid of failure because of it. I grew up seeing that just because I fricked up doesn't mean I am a frick up. My parents made a clear distinction between the two. My career is what it is today because I am not afraid to jump into a job and stumble around figuring things out. Every boss I had was happy I was that way, since a good boss prefers to answer questions after someone has tried and failed opposed to not trying at all. Beat them with jumper cables. Driving your car with a case of 24 beers between you and the passenger seat. Send a 12-year-old to grab a pack of smokes from a nearby cigarette vending machine. How I walked to school every day and didn't get violated or die from K11. Then I got a car. I'll never know. We didn't have buses. Riding without seatbelts. In the back of the station wagon. Being left in the car while she went in the bank or the store. Walking a mile to piano lessons. Alone. From school. At age 6. Changing clothes, being naked in the car. Being out past curfew. One night I was walking home at like 1 o'clock in the morning. My parents knew I was hanging out at my brother's place. I got stopped by a cop who asked where I was going this late at night. I told him going home from my brother's. Didn't even bat an eye that I was out like 2 hours past curfew. I'm sure now someone's parents would have got a call. A few that people have touched on, and a few that are new. Put the kids in the back of the pickup when you're driving somewhere. Let the kids out for the day with ambiguous instructions about when to be back. Dinner, dark, and when the streetlights came on were common. It was acceptable, frowned upon, but common. For kids to smoke, our high school even had a smoking area for students. Talking to strangers was encouraged as socially normal. Spankings bordering on child abuse. Freaking the 14-year-old babysitter was the dad's prerogative and practically part of the job description. I'm serious here. Things have changed that much. For the smoking thing, I graduated HS in 2009 and we had a designated senior smoking section that was deaf. Frowned upon, but as long as you were 18 you were okay. Leaving a kid in the car when you run into the store, bank, post office, etc. Use extreme corporal punishments such as beatings with belts to discipline their children. Smoking in planes. Guess that isn't specific to parents, but it was bad for everyone, kids included. Chicken pox parties. Yay man. Developed countries raise pussies. It's kind of frick that people think that's because abuse is no longer socially acceptable. Halloween by age 9 was just having a friend come over and walking the neighborhood together from 6 until 10 p.m. with giant paper grocery bags. There were no street lights and we didn't even carry a flashlight. We were stuffing so much candy into our mouths that we mumbled the words trick or treat. Nobody had the slightest fear that something bad would happen. I feel sorry for kids who never experienced this. Teaching your kids to tend bar. By the time I was in middle school I knew how to correctly open wine bottles, pick out red versus white wine glasses and mix drinks so my parents wouldn't have to get up to get a refill. That is a handy talent. For pregnant women, food and drinks. So often now it's like you can't eat any soft cheese, seafood, ham, or you can't drink anything with caffeine in it and so on, or you're already seen as a neglectful parent. It's all about moderation. Pregnant women can have a cup of coffee and the baby will be fine, just not 10 a day every day of their pregnancy. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.